George Washington's birthday is a national holiday. Each year we celebrate it on the third Monday in February. At this time, there are special ceremonies. And students all over the land remember the man who is called the father of our country. George Washington is one of our greatest national heroes. He was Commander-in-Chief of the Colonial Army in the Revolutionary War, Chairman of the convention that drafted the Constitution, and the first President of the United States. As a national leader, he played a decisive role in turning this country into a self-governing nation. Born in 1732, Washington came from a prosperous Virginia farm family who had lived in America for nearly 100 years. A typical country boy, he loved to gallop his pony over fields and meadows and play Indian games with his brothers and sisters. Much has been written about Washington's boyhood, but the best-known story probably never happened at all. It tells how young George used his brand-new hatchet to chop down his father's cherry tree, and later confessing, "I cannot tell a lie." First appearing in a book, the legend was created to dramatize Washington's bravery and honesty. It was loved by many generations of boys and girls. In his youth, George was trained to be a surveyor. He was living at Mount Vernon with his older brother Lawrence and his family. George moved here after the death of his father. It was near Mount Vernon where he got his first job. Still in his teens, he was hired by a family friend to help survey territory beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains. A few years later, George joined the Virginia militia and at 21 was sent on a dangerous mission across the mountains. Carrying an important message for the French commander, it was 10 weeks before he returned home, and twice he was nearly killed by Indians. As a soldier, he won recognition as an aide and advisor to General Braddock and fought successfully in the French and Indian War. Soon afterwards, Washington became a major general, and at 23, he was appointed commander of the entire Virginia militia. This greatly increased his military experience. After the French and Indian War, Washington married Martha Custis, a widow who owned many acres of land in Virginia. He adopted her 2 children and became a devoted father. In the years that followed, he became one of the wealthiest and wisest Virginia landowners. He used only the latest methods of scientific farming and devoted much of his time to managing his lands. Washington was happy as a gentleman farmer, but because he had a strong sense of patriotic duty, he became a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses. Like many colonial leaders, he opposed the harsh laws and unfair taxes imposed on the colonies by the British, and although he strongly favored colonial resistance, he was opposed to total independence. As a delegate to the First Continental Congress, he argued against separation from England. But after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, he changed his mind. He went to Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress, which acted swiftly to declare war, and to appoint George Washington commander of the Colonial Army. He left at once to take command. When he arrived in Boston, he was shocked by the terrible condition of his troops. Immediately, he undertook the enormous task of turning a shabby, poorly trained group of farmers and part-time soldiers into an army strong enough to stand against the powerful British. At first, the colonial army was defeated everywhere. The British were victorious in New York and Philadelphia, and the colonists were forced to retreat. Still, Washington felt that his men had only to hold out to win the war. Knowing it was unwise to attack, he worked patiently to train his men and hold them together. Often he used his own money to clothe and feed them, and although he was a strict disciplinarian, he was respected by all of them. Then, in 1777, the colonial forces had an important victory at Saratoga. This changed the course of the war and paved the way for French entry. But there were 4 more years of terrible conflict before it was over. With French aid, the colonists won the battle at Yorktown. And within a month, the British surrendered. This brilliant victory virtually ended the war and set the colonies free. With peace, Washington returned home to Mount Vernon, but his years of public service were far from over. The nation was free, but there were quarrels between the states and a weak central government that was powerless to enforce laws. Troubled, Washington met with other leading citizens and agreed that a convention of the 13 states should be called to try to solve the problems of the new nation. From this convention at the Philadelphia State House in 1787 came one of the most important documents in history, the United States Constitution. George Washington was the presiding officer, and under his guidance, the delegates drafted a constitution that provided a strong central government and still allowed freedom for the states. When it was time to choose the nation's first president, there was little doubt about who it would be. George Washington was unanimously elected. He was inaugurated in New York on April 30th, 1789. In his cabinet, he included some of the wisest, most respected men in the land. With them, he brought unity to the country and gave strength and dignity to its young government. His ideas of liberty and democracy set standards that have been followed by later presidents and by the entire nation. 4 years later, he was unanimously re-elected, but he began to encounter some strong political opposition. Refusing a third term, he retired to Mount Vernon, where he enjoyed a busy, active private life. He died on December 14th, 1799, and was buried at Mount Vernon. Washington's passing was mourned by the entire nation and by people all over the world. He was a truly remarkable man. Since that day, the memory of George Washington has been honored in many ways. The capital of our nation is named for him. There are monuments and memorials in almost every city in the land. And each year, we set aside a special day to pay our respects to George Washington, the father of our country.